This podcast is brought to you by Humans, the next generation HRIS supporting distributed organizations globally.
Sarah, thanks very much for joining me today. I'm massively excited about this conversation.
Me too.
Fantastic. So I think we can jump straight in with a little bit of introduction. You can tell us more about, who you are, what you do, and also how you end up in the people and HR space. And I know now also kind of beyond that as well. But tell me more.
Tell me more. Well, how I ended up in the people spaces is a bit of a story. I have what I think is known as a squiggly career. I have been in my time a social researcher. I have been a consumer goods brand strategist and marketeer. I've worked in food, beer, coffee before landing in the consulting world for a long time, where I worked with everything from small founder-led scale-ups to multinational companies in a lot of tech and a lot of biotech, a lot of pharma, a lot of financial services, different companies, broadly covering, in that stage of my career, everything from exec team coaching to kind of talent strategies on a broader scale. So I've worked with a lot of different businesses in a lot of different contexts and a lot of different problems, but the common thread running through was always wherever I was, whatever I was doing, I was building people capability, building teams, building organizations. And so when I had the opportunity to land in startup world in a fintech, leading the people team, I wasn't going to turn that down. And so I landed formally in the people ops space in a chief people officer role when I landed at BCB Group, having been in the people space for the best part of 20 years. But that's how I finally landed in the people ops space formally.
Amazing. And did we enjoy that experience?
It was the biggest privilege, incredible learning experience, building everything from the ground up, starting not entirely with a blank sheet of paper, but nearly, scaling an organization from when it was like 30 people when I joined to over 150, building it, putting the infrastructure in place, restructuring it, changing it, getting some things wrong, learning how to get things right, putting into practice everything that you'd kind of done in a big company environment and in more established companies, and building it from the ground up was just the most incredible experience. Really, really, really incredible. And I've absolutely got the startup bug. Absolutely.
You've been part of, again, such a variety of journeys, like, different sizes, different scale, different stages. Is there anything specific that, you enjoy about this stage, or anything specific that you enjoy about a specific stage of growth?
I think what it is for me, look, my powers and my skills and what I do is build people, either individually or a team or organization scale. I build the people that will deliver the thing that the business is doing, right? But I just get the most, my sources of energy are those people, right? I find founders the most incredible source of energy and inspiration. I find the people who build these companies, build the tech, build the operations of these businesses. I just find incredible inspiration from these people. There is not a day when you don't learn something. And I just find it the most incredible playground to do what I do, which is to get the organization working right. That's so much more fun in a world that is constantly inventing and constantly creating and constantly living, 3 feet from the cliff, where you've got to innovate and you've got to really be on it and do what matters now. I find that very invigorating and very inspiring. A lot of the principles that you work with in a much larger company apply, but you've got to be a ballerina in how you put them into practice, which is great fun.
Absolutely, and I see that quite a bit as we build and scale humans as well. One thing that I want to ask, we're going to cover quite a few topics today, but specifically we're going to stay within the performance, how you actually build organization to scale with high standards. What is performance, high standard in the context of organization for you? Like for some people can be, you need to hit your KPIs, you need to hit your revenue goals, you need to have engineering teams that are shipping on time. What is that for you?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think it's quite incredible sometimes how much myth can exist. I've always found it incredible how people can come up with such evidence about the high-performing job that they're doing, and then you're actually not quite sure you agree, right? Because what people tend to be inclined to do is just look at their job description and look at the kind of performance standards that you might have defined in your organization. If you are an individual contributor or a manager, this is what this is what the playbook says that performance looks like. And that's obviously one lens that you have to look at it through, right? How do you define performance at an individual level, in an individual job, in an individual function? But fundamentally, in any business, but it is particularly visible in a smaller organization that is trying to scale, fundamentally, what the business is trying to achieve and what that business's milestones are should drive absolutely everybody. And for example, there's no use the sales team focusing on new customer KPIs when actually, in order to hit the milestones for the next investment round, it's turning the top 5 customers profitable that matters, right? You've got to plug everybody in to what the business performance is. And I think that's the really, really, really hard bit. How do you plug every single individual's performance into what business performance look like? And how do you do that even when things are changing? That alignment piece that has, you've got a high-performing organization, I think, when you can go to any single person, regardless of what their job is or how senior they are, and say, tell me how your job right now and what you are doing to drive the outcomes that are important for the business in the next 6 to 12 months. If they can tell you that story during a direct line of sight to what the CEO is worried about, then you know you've got high performance, because then you know you've got people who are in tune with the business, who are flexible in their skill set, who are driving the outcomes that matter, not being a slave to a job description, right? So it's difficult.
I'm curious how you think about alignment. Like, I have been part of a number of organizations who are scaling at a pretty substantial pace, and I've seen anything from like a few people in a room to kind of 1,000 multi-billion-dollar organizations. And when these companies are scaling really quickly, there is a lot of ambiguity. Like priorities are changing really fast, and having people aligned and on the same page all the time is very challenging.
Yes.
Like, how do you do that? How do you ensure the alignment?
There's one thing, it's very challenging, very, very challenging. And if there's one thing which is constant, it's that something's going to change, right? Getting alignment is, and there's one truth about it, is that if you can never communicate clearly enough or regularly enough, things change in business at whatever scale. I've experienced change in enormous organizations, and I've experienced change in tiny organizations. And you might feel the whiplash of it more instantly in a small organization, but it exists everywhere. Small organizations or scaling organizations tend to resist formal communication structures because they think they are corporate things, which we don't like because we're a startup. But if there's one area where I will argue until the day I die that whatever size company you are, you need to formalize a plan, it's internal communications, right? Because things are going to change all the time. And people have to understand this is what's happening in our market, this is what we're hearing from our investors, this is what we're hearing from our customers, these are the 3 things we need to achieve as a business. And this week one of them changed, and this is what it means for you. I think that you've got to communicate that all the time, weekly, to the whole organization, because if you really want everyone pointing in the same direction, you can't leave much open for interpretation. There was this analogy that we used at BCB, where I've spent the past couple of years, around steering a ship through 2 icebergs. And that the job is, we're going to win if we can steer the ship between 2 icebergs. But if one of these 150 people are pointing the boat 1 degree in the wrong direction, we crash. That's all it takes, right? We've got 150 people rowing our ship. If one person is not rowing the right way, we could crash into an iceberg. That's the startup game, right? That's the business journey game. And that was where we always kind of use as a test to say, how aligned are we? Because that's how aligned you need to be.
Who's going to be responsible for formalizing the plan and also for enforcing it? Because, companies, things can get busy, right? Priorities are changing, and sometimes, in particular in the early days, there is this, fight for survival. Like, we need to do whatever it takes to get to the next funding round, the next revenue milestones. And Sarah, I don't have time to formalize a plan and make sure that people. How do you do it? Who's going to do it?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on kind of the formal resource that you have in place, right? at a certain scale, you've got a chief of staff or a COO or someone whose job it is to do that, right? You've got a head of delivery who is literally responsible for making sure that that happens all the time. I think and again, I'm talking about, with my experience in a scale up where you are still kind of sub 150 people and you don't necessarily have those big job descriptions in place yet. In the way that you have the leadership team constructed, somebody's got to play that role. Somebody's got to actually own the coordination of it, because the communication is everybody's job, right? If anyone junior in an organization doesn't know what they're doing, I know that their leader has not done their job, right? I could look up and go, right, you've not communicated something. But fundamentally, it's got to be coordinated. And so somebody's got to take on that role. So somewhere within the shape of a leadership team, whether it's in a larger organization where there's a formalized role and internal comms departments, wouldn't we all like to have one of those? Or whether it's informal, somebody's got to take ownership of it. Somebody with that internal lens who understands what people are thinking and feeling, who's got their finger on the pulse of the organization, and who is good at empathetic communication, right? Somebody's got to say, I'm going to drive that. I'm going to hold everyone accountable for it, because I don't own it, I own the coordination of it. And if that's the CEO, great. If it's not, CEO's got to find someone who is more inclined to do that, because I don't think it happens naturally.
As you touch on the accountability piece, like, how do you keep people accountable, especially in organization of this size, like owning the impact, like, having people that actually can, focus on that is extremely important. But how do you keep people accountable? How do you approach that?
Yeah. It's incredible how quickly that becomes difficult, I think. And again, we're talking about organizations that have just gone. When you're a startup, when you're the first 10 people, I can see them all on a Zoom screen. And I can look them all in the whites of their eyes. And we're all in this together. We're all basically up shit creek together, right? And you're that size. I think in scale-ups, once you're past 30 people, that's impossible. And accountability can get incredibly diluted very far quicker than people realize when they scale an organization. I think it's about 30 people mark that changes. And the reason it changes is that you now have and anything larger than that, but as small as 30 people, you've got a CEO managing managers, right? There's an incredible potential for dilution of messaging and dilution of alignment. And if you want people to be accountable, you need to, you can't have accountability without alignment. Otherwise, accountable for what, right? It's all very well holding people accountable when things go wrong, but if you haven't aligned them on what you're looking for in the first place, it's going to go wrong. So the alignment is absolutely critical, and then I think, how do you hold people accountable without imposing unnecessary tracking mechanisms onto organizations, or unnecessary process that bogs the organization down in measuring whether or not we're doing what we say we're doing. That's important, because actually, we all know in larger organizations that lots of people hiding, not doing very much. So you've got to have absolute clarity of alignment, and you've got to have a culture and the process that support your ability to actually understand whether each individual is delivering, everything they can towards that, and at team level as well. You've got to have some process, and you've got to create the culture that actually rewards accountability.
It's interesting that you mentioned the 30 people mark, as I recall a conversation I had with one of investors a while ago, where she was like, as soon as you cross the 30 people, every time you kind of 2x in size, you have kind of a different company. And
Yes.
You need to change the structure, rethink about the process that you have in place. Are you communicating things the right way? Are you communicating with the right cadence? Like, what are the things and systems and patterns you need to put in place to make sure that actually the company is staying, as I say, pointing directly, in the middle of the two icebergs there.
Yeah.
What is the role of strong feedback loop into this from your perspective? In particular, when you get misalignment, like there's some people that they believe they're doing the right thing for the company, they believe they are contributing the right way, maybe they're not doing that, and you need to make sure that they have awareness that that is the case. And sometimes feedback is difficult to provide, in particular if it's direct, if it is something about not going exactly right. So how do you navigate that?
Yeah. You're right, the feedback loop, whichever direction it's in, right, whether it's feedback down or sideways or up, is really critical. And I could not agree more with that investor who told you that every time you double in size after 30 people, you have a different organization, because you are not in control of the culture. You can't control the culture after that point. You have to nurture it and inject the right energies into it, but it will take on its own life, whether you like it or not at that point. And feedback is the mechanism by which we understand whether or not this organization is working the right way or is it not. My belief about, I feel very strongly with feedback, whether it is to an individual below or above you, that there has to be a culture of candor. Absolutely has to be a culture of candor. You have to celebrate and highlight where difficult feedback is taken on board or given, in order to demonstrate that candor is the culture here. Feedback has got to be regular, not twice yearly. That's another thing, right? Feedback cycles are just a terrible plan. That's by definite. You wouldn't build a piece of software and then only test it with its users once every 6 months in order to decide whether it's working or not. Why do we do that with people? It's ridiculous. But I also, whilst I will fight the good fight for honest, direct, and in the moment feedback until the day I die, what I do not agree with is this idea that all feedback should be direct, right? Because in any conversation, power dynamics exist. In the flattest of hierarchies, power dynamics exist because someone is got more power than somebody else. Whether that power is defined in a job description, whether that power is cultural, gender-based, age-based, personality style-based. An extrovert versus an introvert creates a power dynamic in a conversation. Power dynamics exist, and there have to be mechanisms for anonymous feedback in the organization, right? Between peers, upwards to leadership. There's got to be the mechanisms created for that, in my view, because that's the only way you can actually be sure you're going to hear everything that you need to hear about how your organization is working. And there's lots of ways of doing that. That's my philosophy on feedback: honest, brutal, direct candor, and also the opportunities built structurally into the comms channels of the business for anonymous feedback and anonymous questions. You learn a lot from anonymous questions.
How is there any advice you would have for people that actually are going to receive the direct feedback? Because I think there's also an element of your background experience, where you're coming from, that plays a role into that. Maybe I'm not used to direct feedback, and I'm going to feel hurt. Like, why are you doing this to me? That's a lot to take. So how would you think about that?
Maybe when you receive very, very direct feedback that hurts, you have to ask yourself, what does that feedback mean to me? Why does it hurt? What is it about that feedback that hurts? Does it hurt because it actually touches on something that I fear might be true about myself? If it hurts because it touches on that something you fear might be true about yourself, well, then you need to be brave and you need to listen to it. But equally, I think you can sometimes hear difficult feedback and think about, what is it that made that person say this? Like, what was driving, whether you know who it is or not, right? What might have been behind this person's feedback? What frustrations might this feedback reveal that even if I don't agree directly with this piece of feedback, I can learn something from it. There's a tension somewhere that caused someone to want to give this feedback. Whether I agree with the specifics of it or not, there is something that I need to resolve there. There's a tension and I've got a responsibility to resolve it. Almost never is difficult feedback given out of spite, purely to cause pain. That just doesn't, it's not never, but it's almost never. There's always something to be learned from it. And the brave thing to do is to work out what.
We are talking about organizations that are experiencing a lot of change, and effectively the way I see, startup scale-ups, they're kind of, organism, like, living and breathing and things, can be, pretty fascinating, I guess, definitely from the outside, for me personally, from the inside as well. But one thing that is constant is very difficult to also keep, the morale very high, because you're going through all this change, ups and downs. I really can't think of a company that got to some very substantial level of scale without experiencing some good level of, pain and downs. Like, how do you make sure that the team, the people they are building these companies can have the really high level of morale that obviously has an impact on productivity, efficiency? How would you think about that?
Yeah. I think that links very nicely to the previous question actually about feedback. People like being listened to, and they like to feel that their experiences are cared about by their leadership. So, before directly answering the question, let's kind of link that to the previous one. When times are tough, you have got to dial up your listening mechanisms. As a leadership team, you've got to have your listening mechanisms working extremely well, because you need to understand how your people are experiencing this change and this ambiguity and this chaos that's going on around them. And B, the very, very fact of listening gives people a sense of security, right? Because we can experience a difficult market, uncertainty in the financial fortunes of the company, for example. If we feel that we have a shared experience of that and that we all acknowledge it's difficult, then at least we're in that together, right? At least we're in it together. And, no one's ignoring anyone else. I think that's fundamentally critical. We can cope with a hell of a lot more if we know we're in it together with other people. We've got comrades in the war, right? But I think the thing with ambiguity and chaos and change is that it's just going to be there, right? It's always going to be there. The worst thing you can possibly do is try and keep morale high by sugarcoating, right? By treating people like children and saying, don't worry, it's going to be fine. Oh, but look at the good news over here. Look at the good news over here. Of course you should highlight strengths and wins. But people aren't stupid. People are adults, and they want to kind of feel, no one wants to feel like you're patronizing them or not being honest with them. So I do believe very, very strongly in honesty. Because actually what really hurts people and what's very, very hard for people to deal with is panicked and chaotic responses to chaos. We can all deal with change and we can all deal with chaos if how we approach it is with real focus on what matters, brutal focus on what matters and what we're going to do to ride through this wave, and the culture which, as I said, says we're in this together, right? I think Churchill said something about never let a good crisis go to waste, or I'm pretty sure that's Churchill, that one, isn't it? But he was right. He was right.
I think so.
He was right. When crisis hits, that's sometimes when you see the best out of organisations, and that happens when it absolutely cuts out all the unnecessary activity. It says to people, this is what matters. And you see the best team spirit galvanise around fixing something in a crisis. And focusing on what really matters, which is probably your customers, and are your customers getting what your customers need, right? That can be an incredible North Star in a time of crisis. So if we're delivering for customers, we're going to ride this through. I think the worst thing you can do is pretend that change is a bad thing, that change is not going to happen, and poor us, a crisis happened. If you've hired the right people in your company, then actually they'll be there with you. They'll be there with you, keeping the ship afloat.
Do you think there's also an element of expectations that are changing or changed over the last few years? Like, when we look at the last 10 years, for example, things have been pretty solid until obviously end of 2021, and then things had to get very rough. So everything was pretty going up and to the right, and people coming into the world of work have no experience, like, big pain and, to an extent, obviously. But then again, 2022, 2023, brutal. What's your view there?
I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think that the age at which you enter the workforce does have an impact on your expectations, right? And I entered the workforce in the early 2000s and had a lovely ride until 2008, and I was part of that generation, right? That was a little bit surprised when things got a little bit tough, right? Whereas people, who kind of entered the world of work in 2008, 2009 had a somewhat different induction, right?
I started 2010 roughly, so
right,
again,
right. So you,
it was not as pretty.
Thanks for pointing out how much older than you I am. That's really lovely. But that does have an impact, right? And actually, I think, almost counterintuitively, as you experience more of these peaks and troughs, right? I mean, you and I have now been through a few of them, right, in our careers. You learn a sense of perspective, you learn how to transcend the situation and understand how to focus yourself, and your expectations of what your working life will be, of how difficult it will be, of how lucrative it will be, of how much you're going to have to upskill yourself. Our expectations are well moderated now because we have been through enough to understand how to navigate that and how to make sure that our skill stays relevant in the world, and that we know what tough times are like and what good times are like. I think what has the past few years done to expectations? Well, I think it's changed expectations in a number of ways. Where I think it hasn't given anyone a sense of full security, right, about careers or their working lives. Everyone knows it's going to be tough, right? I mean, that's one thing anyone who's been working for the past few years knows. It has absolutely changed expectations around working style. And I think we are quite early, frankly, in the hybrid working debate, right? People's expectations about where they will work, how they will be managed, and what will be expected of them and how they will be compensated for their work, have been fundamentally changed irreversibly in many ways. And to a really large extent, I think that that companies are still quite early in their thinking around, is it office or is it remote or is it some kind of, weird mesh in the middle. I think that debate's got a long way to go, and before we really understand what drives performance in different organisations and what drives employee loyalty and so on. And certainly a lot of companies are experiencing a gap between leadership expectations and employee expectations. I don't always think leadership got it right. So, but equally, neither do the employees on the other end of it. So yes, I think a lot of expectations have changed. I think there's a lot of expectation management to be done by leadership teams on what their employees can expect. But I think leadership teams are going to have to work much, much harder in justifying those decisions they make about why we have a certain working pattern, why why your compensation and your benefits is the way it is, right? There's greater transparency. That's another thing which dramatically changed, right? In terms of employee expectations, salary transparency, which is coming, whether you like it or not, slower in the UK than in the rest of Europe, obviously. But leadership teams are going to have to justify that expectation management that they're doing in every area of the world of work, right? In working patterns, in performance standards, in comp, in benefits and everything. Hierarchy is shattered in that sense.
Is there, if you look specifically at the short, medium term, let's say 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, is there anything specific that you would expect, and there is any level of calibration that you would expect? Or let's say you mentioned different way of working with hybrid, remote, on-site, like any observation also around level of performance that you can expect with a different working setup, that again, you already noticed?
I mean, I think in the next 6 to 12 months, what we will start to see is the examples of organisations that have really got this right. I think we'll start to see some success stories, of organisations which have really defined a new performance model in terms of the way of working, who break the office or no office debate and come up with a third way which is better, right? And who can link that with data to individual and company performance, right? We haven't really got that yet. We've got a lot of stuff. We've got a lot of debate about it. And I don't think I know what the answer is, but I do think we're going to start to see some really, really, really good example and best practice coming through of companies that have innovated and tested and looked at it with the data, because, you know, and shown why taking certain decisions about how to manage the workforce have driven a company outcome or driven costs down but kept performance high, for example. We're going to start to see this debate turn into real commercial hard metrics with the analysis behind it. I hope we do anyway. I hope I'm right, because we sure as hell need a little bit of clarity in that very highly emotionally charged debate.
You have an intuition that is based on some of the leading indicators that you observe around what might be, you know, working the right setup or the best setup.
Yeah, so I've got a hunch. You know, I put my neck on the line and say, here's what here's some of the things which I think will turn out to be true. I've not seen direct measurement at an individual level which says that office attendance drives individual performance. In fact, quite the opposite, right? I also think fully 100% remote work is not correlated with high individual performance at an individual level. Because I think that makes a lot of intuitive sense, because I think individually, you know, I need the mix. I need to get my work done alone. I can perfectly well collaborate 80% of the time virtually, but fundamentally I learn a hell of a lot by listening to other people and interacting with people, and I build relationships in a way I can't. But I also know from the business perspective, office space is an absolutely phenomenal cost, right? So my hypothesis would be that some of the winning models are going to emerge with far more flexible and innovative hybrid models that are less based on office space that you have to come to 2 to 3 days a week, certainly in larger organisations, and far more based on a far more intelligent use of team days, team offsites, collaborative workshops, where working together face to face is a constant part of our lives, but is driven not by how many days of the week I happen to be face to face, but by the work that I am doing, right? That face to face collaboration, which is attached to a space cost, right? A hire of a room, a hire of some office space. Let's come together and have businesses spend that money in a way that is driven by the work being done, not by FaceTime. I would rather spend, for example, I would rather triple my annual budget for bringing teams together for collaborative workshops and halve my office space costs. No-brainer, absolute no-brainer, right? Because I think that is the right way to bring people together face to face. The wrong way is to insist that you turn up and try and get your work done in a noisy place. So that would be my hunch.
I mean, the one risk I see, and I'm curious if you disagree or agree there, is some of the spontaneous conversation might be missing with the model, right? Because if you, I don't want to say force, but if you bring people together specifically for a workshop, a teamwork, like, you know why you're there.
Yeah.
Versus sometimes, like, even, you know, the reason why Humans exists today is because some, you know, spontaneous conversation my co-founder Carly and I were having, you know, at the office. Maybe it was a coffee break, maybe it was going out for a walk at lunchtime, or maybe we had a very stressful day and we want to just, you know, vent a little bit, and then you start talking and dreaming about stuff. And it was not necessarily about, you know, humans, but also about things that can be highly beneficial for the business. How do we get more efficient in this area? How do we build this feature? How do we, you know, introduce some element of innovation that can contribute to business value? So what's your view there?
Yeah. You know, there's going to be real magic, isn't there, to striking that balance. I've heard some kind of early test cases of organisations that have gone with a 1 week a month, the whole organisation will come together in one location. Clearly that's not possible for some companies, but we're all going to come together for a week a month. That's going to be the week where we're going to have our, we're going to kind of have our, strategy sprints, and we're going to work in our teams, but then we're also going to cross-fertilise with other teams, right? But we're all going to do that in one big location for 1 week, right? So coffee, machine, water cooler interaction happens in a way that is blended with the workshop space or the team sprint space, and the company town hall space, right? Which kind of all happens in like kind of it's one hell of an intense week, right? You're going to need 3 weeks working at home after that. But you're kind of bringing together all of those different working moments that provide value in different ways to the outcomes of the teams and the business that you're working in. But you're bringing it together almost in a in a more fertile space where people can collaborate intensively and build connections in a way that having an office space which people come to just gets, is quite a blunt solution to what is fundamentally a business problem. And the problem with, and you might be able to kind of guess that I'm not the biggest fan of the back to the office mandate, right? You're probably picking that up. There are no doubt workforces where that is more relevant, where you're meeting face-to-face clients and you need a space to bring those clients into, for example. There's all sorts of examples of the types of work where sitting in a formal office is more valuable. But the point is it's driven by the work, not by the desire to monitor, right? The way in which we work and the spaces in which we work and the ways in which we collaborate with other people should be driven by the nature of the work that we're doing, not by lack of trust, right? And if the nature of the work and what we're trying to achieve together drives your decisions, you're going to come up with a different model to, no, I simply don't trust that you're working hard enough or that you're doing the right thing if we're not together. That's just a very expensive way of compensating for lazy management, right? And I think there's a lot of that. There's a lot of lazy management, inability to upskill managers to effectively manage remotely, for example, that is adding an awful lot of office cost to businesses for the wrong reasons. Absolutely.
You have been coaching and supporting founder, exec, leaders. How do I get this right? Like, I would love to have my team to be extremely effective, extremely productive, contributing to business value, but at the same time, I want them to be successful and achieve their own personal goals, be fulfilled within our organizations. Like, how do we do that? Help me.
So I think let's just try and distill that to its absolute essence. The first thing is, are you all heading to the top of the same mountain? Right? As I said, we started this conversation talking about alignment and what performance looks like. You've got to all be heading through the same two icebergs or heading to the top of the same mountain, and you cannot put enough focus into making sure that that is the case. If that is the case, and you're all up for that same adventure, and that's the values piece, right? Have you hired people who are absolutely chomping at the bit, full of energy, who see themselves as people building a business, not in a way that is limited by the specifics of their job description? If you've hired the right people who are in this together with you, pointing to the top of the mountain is all the management you need in a way, that way, right? Across an organization, I am a huge, huge believer that the single most powerful intervention, certainly from the HR team perspective, one of the single most powerful interventions that I can make in order to scale high performance across a whole organization is building coaching skills in managers. If you've got manager coaches at every level, from the first line managers right up into your senior leadership, if you've got coach managers, then you have people who are building performance, not managing performance. And there is a fundamental difference between the two. So building really, really confident, supportive coaching managers and constantly communicating which way we are going. You can do those two things. You can have, if you haven't got those two things, you can have all of the OKRs you like, but you won't be achieving what you're trying to do. And that's its absolute simplest essence. Are you showing them the North Star, and are people empowering other people? If you're doing those two things, you're probably going the right way.
Amazing. Any resource that you would share, like for the people listening that want to go deeper into any of the topic that we discussed?
So many. Give us
a few, your top.
So my current favourites, I'm really inspired by at the moment, Open.org, which is an open source project around building transparency into organisations, just building up this incredible, led by a guy called Adam Horn, building this incredible bank of resources that are kind of available and really, really forward-thinking, actually, in terms of kind of putting the human at the centre of organisations. So I'd strongly recommend Open.org as a great resource. I'm finding a lot of gems there at the moment.
I think we're good. We covered
right?
a lot of ground.
Yeah. How long have we been going?
Sarah, last before we go, where can people connect with you?
Well, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn because I've got an unusual surname. So Sarah von Landsberg-Sadie is not difficult to find on LinkedIn. So find me there. Please connect. That would be great. It'd be great to meet more of your community, the lovely Humans community.
Thanks very much. This has been truly special. Massively appreciate you taking the time.
Really fun. Thank you, Giovanni.
Thank you.